Hello, my beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings. This is a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, all while deepening in your connection with your beautiful team of angels who love you so. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes designed to inspire your spirit. And you can learn more at my website, illuminatingsouls.com. But for now, the angels and I are here to help you rest and to keep you company over the next hour or so. This podcast is a mashup of two of my favorite forms of self-care. You know, in the world like it is today, self-care is so important. And it's important that you find the method of self-care that works best for you. You know, one of the things that I think is hard is as we scroll through social media and we perceive what other people are doing for self-care, and we think, I should do that. And then we experiment with it and we find it doesn't work. For instance, I don't know if this will surprise you or not, but I do not have a regular meditation practice. So I'm not someone who regularly meditates in a conventional way, although I think much of my work is a form of meditation for me. I also do not do yoga. Again, for those of you who know me, you will not be surprised by this. I don't actually have a lot of regular spiritual practices, except to say much of my life is my spiritual practice. I just thought I would share that because I think sometimes we think the bar is set really high about what our self-care and our spiritual path is supposed to look like. And so I thought I would lower the bar a bit. So two of my favorite forms of self-care are connecting with the angels, which you can do any time of the day or night. You do not need to engage in intentional prayer or meditation. You can be informal with them. Hi, hey, angels. Hey, help. It can be very informal. And as for sleep podcasts, I used to be someone that would go to bed watching television. For much of my adult life, that was my pattern. And I don't know, some years ago, I had hurt my shoulder. Not in a bad way, but I had to switch sides of the bed with my husband because I like to sleep on my side. And I couldn't sleep on the side I usually slept on. And so, you know, we sort of went through different trials to see what would work best. And we discovered it was best if we switched sides. And when I switched sides, something about where the television is situated in our bedroom no longer was great for me. I mean, I could make it work, but it didn't soothe me in the same way. I don't know if it's that it was a further distance away, or I don't mean to make it sound so complicated, but you know, when things just change and you're like, that's not working for me the way it used to. And other stuff was happening as well. And I found my way to sleep podcasts, and one sleep podcast in particular, which is Sleep With Me by Andrew Ackerman. and I was hooked. I loved his episodes. Every episode was something different, and he had an archive of hundreds of episodes, so I could always pick something new. And I loved the way he brought us into his life for just the normal, ordinary moments of what he was going to buy from Trader Joe's, or what he made for dinner, or what he thought about a movie. And I felt like I was engaged in conversation with a friend. Granted, a one-sided conversation, but a conversation nonetheless. And it was just such a cozy way to drift off to sleep. And so several years ago, that replaced television for me as my bedtime ritual. And I know all of these different self-care gurus say you shouldn't use electronics before you go to bed, but that just doesn't work for me. So I support you in whatever your best nighttime ritual is. You know yourself best. You know what your best wind down routine is. You know how your inner clock and your consciousness work. So I offer up this podcast in case it helps you as a sleep podcast, and if falling asleep to my voice does not sound appealing to you, I will not take it personally. And if you prefer, you can listen during the daytime, and I can keep you company while you go for a walk or fold your laundry or putter around the house or commute to work. Whatever works for you, I'm here for you. And I'm so grateful. So we're going to have a little bit of time with the angels, and then I'm going to read you a story. And the thing that I love so much about sleep podcasts is there's something wonderful about having a friendly, loving, positive voice, whispering and chattering to us slowly and calmly, that in my experience really calms my nervous system. It almost feels like it's an anthropological experience, all of those thousands of years of gathering around the fire of the village while someone told stories. It is a part of how we are wired. So here we are in this beautiful moment together. So I invite you to take a nice deep breath in and just relax and let it go. Whatever your it is, right? We all have something we can let go. So whatever it is, you can just release it, and your angels will help you with this. One of my favorite things to ask for help with is help in clearing my energy field. And so you can ask for the same. You can ask the angels to clear from you anything that does not belong to you, anything that is not yours, anything you no longer wish to carry. The angels can help clear your energy field so that you feel more of a lightness of spirit. So let's do that again. Let's just take another nice deep breath in, just allowing the love to flow to your body, and exhale and just release whatever it is you no longer wish to carry. And if you are preparing for sleep, I invite you to cozy on up and snuggle on in. It's one of my favorite times of day. I love crawling into bed at the end of the day. I do not enjoy being in bed during the daytime, But I love that time of night when it's time and I get so excited. I get so happy to crawl in between the sheets and fluff up the pillows and pull the blankets up over my head because I sleep like a turtle. I put the blankets over my head. I don't know, I'm sure that's a metaphor for something, but that's how I sleep until I get really hot and then I throw everything off. So, more than you ever wanted to know about my sleep style, but we all have it, right? Whether you sleep on your side or on your stomach, whether you sleep burrito style with the blankets and sheets tucked up around your legs, or if everything is tucked in just so. Each of us have our own style of sleeping, and so I invite you to get comfortable in whatever way works best for you. And I'm going to call the angels in, even though they're already here. I love inviting them in so that you know they are here as well. So beautiful angels on high, I ask that you join us here, and it is such a joy to be present here with you and our beautiful beloveds that are receiving this message. Angels, I ask that you bring forward waves upon waves of beautiful divine light. And I also ask that you calm and soothe our nervous systems, helping us to relax so that it is more graceful to move into sleep, bringing waves of healing to our bodies, to our minds, to our emotional bodies, and to all that we are. And dear ones, just visualize, imagine, allow it to be so that the angels are filling the room you are in with a soft pink light that is filled with divine love that has been calibrated just for you. And this is your time to rest. You have done enough for the day. And if you have any worries, even if they're small or enormous, I affirm that to your angels they will be lighter than a feather. So just give your worries to the angels, and they will carry them to the healing temple in your name, in support of you. And for those of you who haven't taken classes with me before, you may not know that one of my favorite places to visit in guided meditation is a healing temple that exists on the angelic realm. It is such a beautiful invitation. So as you go to sleep tonight, or if you're just sitting in your chair during the day, just come into your imagination. And there's a place where your imagination and your divine guidance overlap. So accessing this through your imagination can be really helpful. So imagine, if you will, that you are traveling very gently up towards the angelic realm. Your angels are helping you with this. And you arrive at a beautiful healing temple. And two huge golden doors swing open at your arrival. And you are met by 3 beautiful beings of light. You can feel their loving essence, and they usher you in to the healing temple. And you can feel the love that is here for you. These angelic beings, they are part of your team. They know who you are, and they are here to help you. They are here to inspire your spirit. And up ahead, you see a beautiful chaise, a lounge chair, if you will. It looks so comfortable. And so your angels lead you over to this comfortable chaise. And it's fitting your body just perfectly. And they place a soft blanket over you. And they invite you to rest here. Well, they take good care of you. They will be clearing and balancing your energy field as you rest. And they will be whispering beautiful soul whispers for you that you need not hear right now, but they may float to you on a thought and a breeze in the days and the weeks to come. So allow yourself to come into a deep space of rest and healing, knowing that your angels and God know what is needed right now. And take a nice deep breath in, receiving the light and the love that is here for you. Your angels are so grateful for this opportunity to be of service to you, for this opportunity to love you. And so you just breathe and relax. And you can remain in the vision of the healing temple, or you can orient yourself back in your bed or in your home, wherever you are, whatever works best for you. The love is here for you, whatever you are imagining or sensing. There is goodness and light here for you now. And so I invite you to rest and drift off. And while you do, I'm going to read you a story. And I thought in this episode we could return back to Anne of Green Gables. I'm just so enjoying reading this with you. I have watched the series Anne with an E and loved it. I've read this book before. I've listened to The Sleepy Bookshelf reading this book before. And there's just something about Anne's spark, her resiliency, her imagination, her brightness that delights me. If this happens to be your first experience of Anne of Green Gables, I'll give you a quick rambling recap. So Anne is an orphan, and she has been adopted by Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert, who are brother and sister who own Green Gables, which is a farm. And they're both in their late 50s and 60s. Marilla is very stern, I guess you can say, but she's got a really good heart. But she doesn't believe in fancy things, or maybe fanciful is a better word for it. She's very practical. And so she has her hands full with Anne because Anne is always daydreaming. She has big dreams and very dramatic and has lots of feelings about everything. And this is all new to Marilla, not to mention Matthew, her brother. And Anne's best friend is Diana Barry, who lives in the next estate over. And so in the last episode, a couple things happened. The town, Avonlea, got a new minister, and the minister's wife came to town. And Anne really wanted to impress them, so she asked Marilla if she could make a cake for when they came over for tea. And Anne, being Anne, had a mishap and accidentally put liniment instead of vanilla into the cake and was mortified. But the minister's wife was really lovely about it. So Anne moved through that trial. And where we're going to be picking up is right after Diana has had a party. And the girls decided to play a game of dare. A bad idea. I used to play truth or dare when I was a kid. And I never did any of the terrible dares. I was like, this is just dumb. I didn't have a big risk factor associated, that was burning bright within me in those days. So I don't know how I would have been as a little girl playing dare back then. But one of the girls dares Anne to walk on, I think they were calling it the ridge pole, on top of the roof, which again, not a good idea. And Anne slips and falls. But fortunately, some bushes broke their fall, but we think she may have sprained her ankle. So Mr. Barry carries her back to the Cuthberts at Green Gables. And Marilla turns white as a sheet because she doesn't know yet if Anne is okay. But of course, Anne is, and this is where we're going to pick up. So Marilla has just run over to Mr. Barry, who is carrying Anne, followed by a procession of all the other little girls. And so Marilla comes up to her. And Anne says to Marilla, "Don't be very frightened, Marilla. I was walking the ridgepole and fell off. I expect I have sprained my ankle, but Marilla, I might have broken my neck. Let's look on the bright side of things." My kind of girl. It's only a sprained ankle. I could have died, so all's good, right? And then Marilla responds, "I might have known you'd go and do something out of the sort when I let you go to that party," said Marilla, sharp and shrewish in her relief. "Bring her in here, Mr. Barry, and lay her on the sofa. Mercy me, the child has gone and fainted." It was quite true. Overcome by the pain of her injury, Anne had one more of her wishes granted to her. She had fainted dead away. Matthew, hastily summoned from the harvest field, was straightway dispatched for the doctor, who in due time came to discover that the injury was more serious than they had supposed. Anne's ankle was broken. That night, when Marilla went up to the east gable, where a white-faced girl was lying, a plaintive voice greeted her from the bed. "Aren't you very sorry for me, Marilla?" "It was your own fault," said Marilla, twitching down the blind and lighting a lamp. And that is just why you should be sorry for me, said Anne, because the thought that it is all my own fault is what makes it so hard. If I could blame it on anybody, I would feel so much better. But what would you have done, Marilla, if you had been dared to walk a ridgepole? I'd have stayed on the good firm ground and let them dare away. Such absurdity, said Marilla. Anne sighed. But you have such strength of mind, Marilla. I haven't. I just felt that I couldn't bear Josie Pye's scorn. She would have cowed over me all my life. And I think I have been punished so much that you needn't be very cross with me, Marilla. It's not a bit nice to faint after all, and the doctor hurt me dreadfully when he was setting my ankle. I won't be able to go around for 6 or 7 weeks, and I'll miss the new lady teacher. She won't be new anymore by the time I'm able to go to school, and everybody will get ahead of me in the class. Oh, I am an afflicted mortal, but I'll try to bear it all bravely, if only you won't be cross with me, Marilla. There, I'm not cross, said Marilla. You're an unlucky child, there's no doubt about that. But as you say, you'll have the suffering of it. Here now, try and eat some supper. Isn't it fortunate I've got such an imagination, said Anne. It will help me through splendidly, I expect. What do people who haven't had any imagination do when they break their bones, do you suppose, Marilla? Anne had good reason to bless her imagination many a time and oft during the tedious 7 weeks that followed. But she was not solely dependent on it. She had many visitors, and not a day passed without one or more of the schoolgirls dropping in to bring her flowers and books and tell her all the happenings in the juvenile world of Avonlea. Everybody has been so good and kind, Marilla, sighed Anne happily on the day when she could first limp across the floor. It isn't very pleasant to be laid up, but there is a bright side to it, Marilla. You find out how many friends you have. Why, even Superintendent Bell came to see me, and he's really a very fine man. Not a kindred spirit, of course, but I still like him, and I'm awfully sorry I ever criticized his prayers. I believe now he really does mean them, only he has gotten into the habit of saying them as if he didn't. If he could get over that, if he'd take a little trouble, I gave him a good broad hint. I told him how hard I tried to make my own little private prayers interesting. He told me all about the time he broke his ankle when he was a boy. It does seem so strange to think of Superintendent Bell of ever being a boy. Even my imagination has its limits, for I can't imagine that. When I try to imagine him as a boy, I see him with gray whiskers and spectacles, just as he looks in Sunday school, only small. Now, it's easy to imagine Mrs. Allen as a little girl. Mrs. Allen has been to see me 14 times. Isn't that something to be proud of, Marilla? When a minister's wife has so many claims on her time. She is such a cheerful person to have visit you, too. She never tells you it's your own fault, and she hopes you'll be a better girl on account of it. Mrs. Lynde always told me that when she came to see me, and she said it in a kind of way that made me feel she might hope I'd be a better girl, but didn't really believe I would. Even Josie Pye came to see me. I received her as politely as I could, because I think she was sorry she dared me to walk a ridgepole. If I had been killed, she would have had to carry a dark burden of remorse all her life. Diana has been a faithful friend. She's been over every day to cheer my lonely pillow. But oh, I shall be so glad when I can go to school, for I've heard such exciting things about the new teacher. The girls all think she is perfectly sweet. Diana says she has the loveliest fair curly hair and such fascinating eyes. She dresses beautifully and her sleeve puffs are bigger than anybody else's in Avonlea. Every other Friday afternoon she has recitations and everybody has to say a piece or take a part in a dialogue. Oh, it's just glorious to think of it. Josie Pye says she hates it, but that is just because Josie has so little imagination. Diana and Ruby Gillis and Jane Andrews are preparing a dialogue called A Morning Visit for next Friday. And the Friday afternoons they don't have recitations. Miss Stacy takes them all to the woods for a field day and they study ferns and flowers and birds. And they have physical culture exercises every morning and evening. Mrs. Lynde says she never heard of such goings-on, and it all comes of having a lady teacher. But I think it must be splendid, and I believe I shall find that Miss Stacy is a kindred spirit. There is one thing plain to be seen, Anne, said Marilla, and that is the fall off your berry roof hasn't injured your tongue at all. And now we're on chapter 24, Miss Stacy and her pupils get up a concert. It was October again when Anne was ready to go back to school, a glorious October, all red and gold with mellow mornings, when the valleys were filled with delicate mists as if the spirit of autumn had poured them in for the sun to drain. Amethyst, pearl, silver, rose, and smoke blue. The dews were so heavy that the fields glistened like cloth of silver, and there were such heaps of rustling leaves in the hollows of many-stemmed woods to run crisply through. The birch path was a canopy of yellow, and the ferns were sere and brown all along it. There was a tang in the very air that inspired the hearts of small maidens tripping, unlike snails, swiftly and willingly to school. And it was jolly to be back again at the little brown desk beside Diana with Ruby Gillis nodding across the aisle and Carrie Sloane sending up notes and Julia Bell passing a chew of gum down from the back seat. Anne drew a long breath of happiness as she sharpened her pencil and arranged her picture cards in her desk. Life was certainly very interesting. In the new teacher, she found another true and helpful friend. Miss Stacy was a bright, sympathetic young woman with the happy gift of winning and holding the affections of her pupils and bringing out the best that was in them mentally and morally. Anne expanded like a flower under this wholesome influence and carried home to the admiring Matthew and the critical Marilla glowing accounts of schoolwork and aims. I love Miss Stacy with my whole heart, Marilla. She is so ladylike, and she has such a sweet voice. When she pronounces my name, I feel instinctively that she's spelling it with an E. We had recitations this afternoon. I just wish you could have been there to hear me recite Mary, Queen of Scots. I just put my whole soul into it. Ruby Gillis told me coming home that the way I said the line, "Now for my father's arms," she said, "my woman's heart farewell," just made her blood run cold. Well now, you might recite it for me one of these days out in the barn, suggested Matthew. Of course I will, said Anne meditatively, but I won't be able to do it so well, I know. It won't be so exciting as it is when you have a whole school full before you hanging breathlessly on your words. I know I won't be able to make your blood run cold. Mrs. Lynde says it made her blood run cold to see the boys climbing to the very tops of those trees on Bell's Hill after crow's nests last Friday, said Marilla. I wonder at Miss Stacy for encouraging it. But we wanted a crow's nest for nature study, explained Anne. That was on our field afternoon. Field afternoons are splendid, Marilla. And Miss Stacy explains everything so beautifully. We have to write compositions on our field afternoons, and I write the best ones. That is very vain of you to say so. You better let your teacher say it. Well, but she did say it, Marilla, and indeed I am not vain about it. How can I be when I am such a dunce at geometry? Although I'm really beginning to see through it a little, too. Miss Stacy makes it so clear. Still, I'll never be good at it, and I assure you it is a humbling reflection. But I love writing compositions. Mostly, Miss Stacy lets us choose our own subjects. But next week we are to write a composition on some remarkable person. It's hard to choose among so many remarkable people who have lived. Mustn't it be splendid to be remarkable and have compositions written about you after you're dead? Oh, I would clearly, dearly love to be remarkable. I think when I grow up, I'll be a trained nurse and go with the Red Crosses to the field of battle as a messenger of mercy. Well, that is, if I don't go out as a foreign missionary. That would be very romantic, but one would have to be very good to be a missionary, and that would be a stumbling block. We have physical culture exercises every day, too. They make you graceful and promote your digestion. Promote fiddlesticks, said Marilla, who honestly thought it was all nonsense. But all the field afternoons and recitation Fridays and physical culture contortions paled before a project which Miss Stacy brought forward in November. This was that the scholars of Avonlea School should get up a concert and hold it in the hall on Christmas night for the laudable purpose of helping to pay for a schoolhouse flag. The pupils, one and all, taking graciously to this plan, the preparations for a program were begun at once. And all of the excited performers-elect, none was so excited as Anne Shirley, who threw herself into the undertaking heart and soul, hampered as she was by Marilla's disapproval. Marilla thought it all rank foolishness. It's just filling your heads up with nonsense and taking time that ought to be put on your lessons, she grumbled. I don't approve of children's getting up concerts and racing about to practices. It makes them vain and forward and fond of gadding. But think of the worthy object, pleaded Anne. A flag will cultivate a spirit of patriotism, Marilla. Fudge. There's precious little patriotism in the thoughts of any of you. All you want is a good time. Well, when you can combine patriotism and fun, isn't it all right? Of course it's real nice to be getting up a concert. We're going to have 6 choruses, and Diana is going to sing a solo. I'm in 2 dialogues, the Society for the Suppression of Gossip and the Fairy Queen. The boys are going to have a dialogue too, and I'm to have 2 recitations, Marilla. I just tremble when I think of it, but it's a nice thrilly kind of tremble, and we're to have a tableau at the last, faith, hope, and charity. Diana and Ruby and I are to be in it, all draped in white with flowing hair. I'm to be hope, with my hands clasped so and my eyes uplifted. I'm going to practice my recitations in the garret. Don't be alarmed if you hear me groaning. I have to groan heart-renderingly in one of them, and it's really hard to get up a good artistic groan, Marilla. Josie Pye is sulky because she didn't get the part after she won it in the dialogue. She wanted to be the fairy queen. That would have been ridiculous, for who ever heard of a fairy queen as big as Josie? Fairy queens must be slender. Jane Andrews is to be the queen, and I am to be one of her maids of honor. Josie says she thinks a red-haired fairy is just as ridiculous as a big one, but I do not let myself mind what Josie says. I'm to have a wreath of white roses on my hair, and Ruby Gillis is going to lend me her slippers because I haven't any of my own. It's necessary for fairies to have slippers, you know. You couldn't imagine a fairy wearing boots, could you? Especially with copper toes? We are going to decorate the hall with creeping spruce and fir mottos and pink tissue paper roses in them. And we are all to march in 2 by 2 after the audience is seated, while Emma White plays a march on the organ. Oh, Marilla, I know you are not so enthusiastic about it as I am, but don't you hope your little Anne will distinguish herself? Well, all I hope is that you'll behave yourself. I'll be heartily glad when all this fuss is over and you'll be able to settle down. You are simply good for nothing just now with your head stuffed full of dialogues and groans and tableaus. As for your tongue, it's a marvel it's not clean worn out. Anne sighed and betook herself to the backyard, over which a young new moon was shining through the leafless poplar boughs from an apple-green western sky, and where Matthew was splitting wood. Anne perched herself on a block and talked the concert over with him, sure of an appreciative and sympathetic listener, in this instance at least. Well now, I reckon it's going to be a pretty good concert, and I expect you'll do your part just fine, he said, smiling down into her eager, vivacious little face. Anne smiled back at him. Those two were the best of friends, and Matthew thanked his stars many a time and oft that he had nothing to do with bringing her up. That was Marilla's exclusive duty. If it had been his, he would have been worried over frequent conflicts between inclination and said duty. As it was, he was free to spoil Anne, Marilla's phrasing, as much as he liked. But it was not such a bad arrangement after all. A little appreciation sometimes does quite as much good as all the conscientious springing up in the world. And we'll go on now to chapter 25. Matthew insists on puffed sleeves. Matthew was having a bad 10 minutes of it. He'd come into the kitchen in the twilight of a cold gray December evening and had sat down in the woodbox corner to take off his heavy boots, unconscious of the fact that Anne and a bevy of her schoolmates were having a practice of the Fairy Queen in the sitting room. Presently they came trooping through the hall and out into the kitchen, laughing and chattering gaily. They did not see Matthew, who shrank bashfully back into the shadows beyond the woodbox with a boot in one hand and a bootjack in the other, and he watched them shyly for the aforesaid 10 minutes as they put on caps and jackets and talked about the dialogue and the concert. Anne stood among them, bright-eyed and animated as they, but Matthew suddenly became conscious that there was something about her different from her mates. And what worried Matthew was that the difference impressed him as being something that should not exist. Anne had a brighter face and bigger, starrier eyes and more delicate features than the others. Well, even shy, unobservant Matthew had learned to take note of these things. But the difference that disturbed him did not consist in any of these respects. Then in what did it consist? Matthew was haunted by this question long after the girls had gone arm in arm down the long, hard, frozen lane, and Anne had betaken herself to her books. He could not refer it to Marilla, who he felt would be quite sure to sniff scornfully and remark that the only difference she saw between Anne and the other girls was that they sometimes kept their tongues quiet, while Anne never did. This Matthew felt would be no great help. He had recourse to his pipe that evening to help him study it out, much to Marilla's disgust. After 2 hours of smoking and hard reflection, Matthew arrived at a solution of his problem. Anne was not dressed like the other girls. The more Matthew thought about the matter, the more he was convinced that Anne never had been dressed like the other girls. Never since she had come to Green Gables. Marilla kept her clothed in plain dark dresses, all made after the same unvarying pattern. If Matthew knew there was such a thing as fashion in dress, it was as much as he did, but he was quite sure that Anne's sleeves did not look like the sleeves the other girls wore. He recalled the cluster of little girls he had seen around her that evening, all gay in waists of red and blue and pink and white, and he wondered why Marilla always kept her so plainly and soberly gowned. Of course, it must be all right. Marilla knew best, and Marilla was bringing her up. Probably some wise, inscrutable motive was to be served thereby, but surely it would do no harm to let the child have one pretty dress, something like Diana Barry always wore. Matthew decided that he would give her one. That surely could not be objected to as an unwarranted putting in of his oar. Christmas was only a fortnight off. A nice new dress would be the very thing for a present. Matthew, with a sigh of satisfaction, put away his pipe and went to bed, while Marilla opened all the doors and aired the house. The very next evening, Matthew betook himself to Carmody to buy the dress, determined to get the worst over and have done with it. It would be, he felt assured, no trifling ordeal. There were some things Matthew could buy and prove himself a no mean bargainer, but he knew he would be at the mercy of shopkeepers when it came to buying a girl's dress. After much cogitation, Matthew resolved to go to Samuel Lawson's store instead of William Blair's. To be sure, the Cuthberts always had gone to William Blair's. It was almost as much a matter of conscience with them as to attend the Presbyterian church and vote Conservative. But William Blair's 2 daughters frequently waited on customers there, and Matthew held them in absolute dread. He could contrive to deal with them when he knew exactly what he wanted and could point it out. But in such a matter as this, requiring explanation and consultation, Matthew felt that he must be sure of a man behind the counter, so he would go to Lawson's, where Samuel or his son would wait on him. But alas, Matthew did not know that Samuel, in the recent expansion of his business, had set up a lady clerk also. She was a niece of his wife's, and a very dashing young person indeed, with huge drooping pompadour, big rolling brown eyes, and a most extensive and bewildering smile. She was dressed with exceeding smartness, and wore several bangle bracelets that glittered and rattled and tinkled with every movement of her hand. Matthew was covered with confusion at finding her there at all. and those bangles completely wrecked his wits at one fell swoop. "What can I do for you this evening, Mr. Cuthbert?" Miss Lucilla Harris inquired briskly and ingratiatingly, tapping the counter with both hands. Have you any garden rakes?" stammered Matthew. Miss Harris looked somewhat surprised, as well as she might, to hear a man inquiring for garden rakes in the middle of December. "I believe we have one or two left over," she said, "but they're upstairs in the lumber room. I'll go and see." During her absence, Matthew collected his scattered senses for another effort. When Miss Harris returned with the rake and cheerfully inquired, "Anything else tonight, Mr. Cuthbert?" Matthew took his courage in both hands and replied, "Well now, since you suggest it, I might as well buy some hayseed." Miss Harris had heard Matthew Cuthbert called odd. She now concluded that he was entirely crazy. "We only keep hayseed in the spring," she explained loftily. "We have none on hand just now." "Oh, certainly, just as you say," stammered unhappy Matthew, seizing the rake and making for the door. At the threshold he recollected that he had not paid for it, and he turned miserably back while Miss Harris was counting out his change. He rallied his powers for a final desperate attempt. "Well now, if it isn't too much trouble, I might as well. That is, I'd like to look at some sugar." "White or brown?" queried Miss Harris patiently. "Oh, well now, brown," said Matthew feebly. "There's a barrel of it over there," said Miss Harris, shaking her bangles at it. "It's the only kind we have." "I'll take 20 pounds of it," said Matthew, with beads of perspiration standing on his forehead. Matthew had driven halfway home before he was his own man again. It had been a gruesome experience, but it had served him right, he thought, for committing the heresy of going to a strange store. When he reached home, he hid the rake in the tool house, but the sugar he carried in to Marilla. "Brown sugar?" exclaimed Marilla. "Whatever possessed you to get so much? You know I never use it except for the hired man's porridge or black fruit cake. Jerry's gone, and I've made my cake long ago. And it's not good sugar either. It's coarse and dark. William Blair doesn't usually keep sugar like that." "Well, I thought it might come in handy sometime," said Matthew, making good his escape. When Matthew came to think the matter over, he decided that a woman was required to help cope with the situation. Marilla was out of the question. Matthew felt for sure she would throw cold water on his project at once. Remained only Mrs. Lynde, for of no other woman in Avonlea would Matthew have dared to ask advice. Remained only Mrs. Lynde, for of no other woman in Avonlea would Matthew have dared to ask advice. To Mrs. Lynde he went accordingly, and that good lady promptly took the matter out of the harassed man's hands. "Pick out a dress for you to give to Anne?" "To be sure I will. I'm going to Carmody tomorrow, and I'll attend to it. Have you something particular in mind? No? Well, I'll just go by my own judgment then. I believe a nice rich brown would suit Anne, and William Blair had some new Glorias that's real pretty. Perhaps you'd like me to make it up for her too, seeing that if Marilla was to make it, Anne would probably get wind of it before the time and spoil the surprise." "Well, I'll do it." "No, it isn't a mite of trouble. I like sewing. I'll make it to fit my niece, Jenny Gillis, for she and Anne are as like as two peas as far as figure goes." "Well, now, I'm much obliged," said Matthew, "and I don't know, but I think they make the sleeves different nowadays to what they used to be. If it wouldn't be asking too much, I'd like to make them made in the new way. Puffs? Of course. You needn't worry a speck more about it, Matthew. I'll make it up in the very latest fashion, said Mrs. Lynde. To herself, she added when Matthew Lynde had gone, it'll be a real satisfaction to see that poor child wearing something decent for once. The way Marilla dresses her is positively ridiculous, that's what. And I've ached to tell her so plainly a dozen times. I've held my tongue, though, for I can see Marilla doesn't want advice and she thinks she knows more about bringing children up than I do, for all she's an old maid. But that's always the way. Folks that has brought up children know there's no hard and fast method in the world that'll suit every child. But them as never think as all's plain and easy as rule of 3. Just set your 3 terms down, so fashion and they'll some'll work out correct. But flesh and blood don't come under the head of arithmetic, and that's where Marilla Cuthbert makes her mistake. I suppose she's trying to cultivate a spirit of humility in Anne by dressing her as she does. But it's more likely to cultivate envy and discontent. I'm sure the child must feel the difference between her clothes and the other girls. But to think of Matthew taking notice of it, that man is waking up after being asleep for over 60 years. And we'll go ahead and leave off here. So when we pick up the next time, we will learn more about how it's turning out with Matthew's present to Anne. So for now, my beautiful friends, I wish you the sweetest of dreams. I wish you a good rest. And I am deeply grateful for this opportunity to spend time with you here. Thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon.